So aren't you glad that we are beginning to come out of this COVID bewilderness? Doesn't it feel like we're emerging in ways? It's been a long time. Getting our lives in some sort of normal patterns, maybe feeling more like real life. And the upside is we've learned things in this time about ourselves, certainly. But one of the things that I read about was that during the shutdown, the lockdown, when everybody was staying home and working from home and all of that, the level of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere actually decreased. And so it was like we sort of pulled back from the edge of the cliff, the precipice of climate cataclysm, and we see, this is what it takes to save the planet and save the climate and keep the temperature from going up. And so we've learned, and now we're doing everything different. We are applying all these things that we've learned, and we've changed our ways, and we're behaving so well, and everything is good, right? No. we weren't kidding when we said we want to get back to normal, because we are getting back to normal. We are trying to asphyxiate ourselves and our fellow creatures. We are stomping on the environment and trashing the future for our grandchildren and taking the planet over the cliff. Why? We know what it takes. Why are we going back? Because, join me now, we've always done it this way, right? Or for a long time, we've done it this way. And so the snapback is there. Years ago, the minister in my home congregation, I was little, but I remember my parents talking about this. And he was well respected and loved, and this was a farming community, a little church. One Sunday he stood up and he said, "You know what you all need is a couple of good crop failures to bring you to your knees." Yeah, that went over like a lead balloon, right? Yeah. People remember that. Was it true? What do we need? Do we need a couple more years of COVID time? Another shutdown? To bring us to our knees, to bring us to our senses, to awaken us, to get us to change? What does it take? There was a man who had 2 sons. And one day the younger of the 2 sons comes to his father and says, "I want my part of the inheritance now." Now in that culture, as I understand it, whatever is inherited, whatever is passed on to the oldest son in total. And he then shares as he deems fit. The younger son has no claim on anything. So this is audacious and contrary to the way things are done. It doesn't happen this way. What a little jerk, right? Furthermore, to come to his father and demand the inheritance now is like saying, "Drop dead, Dad, I don't want anything to do with you anymore, or this farm or anything. I want my chunk now." What a disrespectful little brat. How disgraceful is that? You wouldn't do that. You would learn that's not right. It would bring shame on your family, on your community. It just isn't the way things are done. And yet here he comes. Well, father certainly would say, "You're joking, right? Out of here." He would not accede to such ridiculous requests or demands. But we're told that he just says, okay, divides the property between them. Doesn't say who gets how much, just it's divided. So now, the younger son and the older son have their chunk of the farm, their piece of land, their bit of the promised land that has come to them, that has been passed down for generations, that is to be passed down to generations in the future. Part of their identity as a family, their sustenance sacred ground, truly sacred ground. They each have their chunk of it, and it's no longer one piece. The reason it's passed down as one piece is so that it will stay in one piece, so that it can sustain a family. If it gets divided up, pretty soon you can't live off of it. And it makes sense. But now we're dividing it. It's broken apart. What would the neighbors say? What do people think of this family and this father? He's out of his mind. This is terrible. That son, if he was my son, boy. And if you want to look up a prescription for such a child and how to handle him, look up Deuteronomy 21, 18 through 21. Go ahead, you can do it any time. And keep reading, because there's other interesting stuff in there too. That's the way we deal with kids like this. Some think, at least. Well, anyway, they each have their chunk of the property. And the younger son sells his off, liquidates it, and then takes off to a foreign country and just he can't spend it fast enough. The proverbial drunken sailor. He thinks, eat, drink, and be merry for who knows. We might not last till tomorrow, but he does last till tomorrow, and the money doesn't. He wakes up one morning, he's got nothing left, there's a famine. If he's going to survive, he has to work, so he gets a job taking care of the pigs. A Jewish swineherd. Does hitting bottom get more vivid than that? I don't think so. Certainly not biblically. And one day then, as the smell of pig and the gnawing of hunger in his belly come together, he wakes up and says, wait a minute, I could do better than this working for my dad. Even though I fouled the nest big time, maybe he'll hire me. So he heads home. And as he goes home, he puts together this speech. He composes a speech and rehearses it as he goes. It's, Father, I have sinned against you. I've sinned. I'm not worthy to be called. I shouldn't. Dad, I messed up big time. I really made a mess of things, and I know you're ashamed of me, and I deserve to be kicked out, and I wouldn't even think of me as your son. If I were you, I wouldn't do it. But would you give me a job? Can I work for you? What happens? His dad would be justified in refusing to even talk to him. Or he could say, you're right. You are not my son any longer. You have disgraced your family and me. You told us you didn't want to have anything to do with us. You separated yourself from us and your community and this land and everything else. You have no right to anything. You are a disgrace. And I don't ever want to see you again, ever. You are dead to me. Get out of here. And certainly some would like to have heard Dad say something like that. Because if what this son catches on, what he did catches on, we could have a real problem in the community. But Jesus tells us in the story that the father sees his son while he's still far off. Physically, he's a long ways away, distant. Spiritually, he's even further. It's his spiritual condition as well as his geographical location. He's far off. So what does Dad do? He runs to him, which is not what a Jewish father would do at that time. He runs to him, throws his arms around him, kisses him, hugs him, starts giving orders. Get him cleaned up, get him new clothes, get him shoes, get him a ring, and let's have a party. Invite all the neighbors, the whole town, because they felt this break in our family. The ripple effect goes out into the community. Everybody feels it. So now I want them to know that this son of mine who was lost has been found, who was dead and gone, is alive again. He has risen, in a way. This is an Easter story, in a way. And we are going to celebrate Easter. And we who celebrate with him rise with him as well, because this is a whole new day. We rise too if we allow resurrection to affect us when it affects someone else. And so the party begins, and then Big Brother shows up. What happens? What happens? Larry was lost. He wasn't the son who took his father's money, his great inheritance, and went off to spend it all foolishly. He didn't know who his father was or where his father was. His father had fathered him and some other kids and taken off and left them with nothing. And that's how they lived. So Larry's inheritance was a great deal of anger, bitterness, and resentment, and he spent that lavishly. And if you wanted to argue with him, he'd argue. If you wanted to fight, he'd fight. Didn't matter about what. You couldn't get close to him. He was troubled, deeply hurt, very, very angry. And his fighting and arguing were just two of the ways that he'd push people away and keep people away so that no more harm came to him than already had. So you can imagine how this worked in school. He was always getting crossways, getting into fights, getting crossways with teachers and other kids and other adults. So he was seen by many as just a troublemaker. And he was treated as such, but not by everybody. One of those people who saw him and treated him differently was Mr. G. Mr. G was one of those who tried to go out and meet him where he was in his lostness. Having observed Larry in class for some time and his anger and his eruptions and his swearing and all of the acting out, and then observing him academically in class, he realized that at least part of Larry's issue was that he couldn't read or write hardly at all. And so when he'd be in a class and he'd be asked to read something or respond to something that he had read by himself, to himself, he couldn't do it, or he would stumble over the words, and it was just painful as he'd stumble and stutter and couldn't sound words out, couldn't figure things out. It was just awful for everybody in the room, and especially for him. And so eventually he learned to just refuse. I'm not reading that crap. He'd use other words. And if the teacher would push him, he'd use words for the teacher. And then he'd get out of class, which was fine with him. He didn't want to be in class anyway. Go to the office, and then you're out of school for a day or two or a week, whatever. Didn't care. Well, Mr. G took a different approach with Larry. And he taught, Mr. G was a kind of a saint in my book. He coached a little bit, but he taught junior high English. Junior high English teachers are saints. He would 2, maybe 3 times a week would assign us to work in teams of 2 or 3. And he'd give us an assignment to read something and write about it, or discuss these questions and write about it, to bring some sort of report back, something like that. And then he would assign somebody to go with Larry to team up, and he'd give them an assignment, which seemed like just like all the others, except it was always to help Larry work on his reading. You just sit and read. Well, I was that other student that was assigned to sit down with Larry. And we'd go off, everybody go off to a corner, to another room that wasn't being used, to the gym, to the cafeteria, wherever, where you could talk. And so nobody knew that he was being tutored, if you will, that he was getting special attention. It was just like everybody else. Well, some of the other teachers did the same sort of thing. Now, Larry would work with people that he I don't know, if respect was too much of a word. I don't think he really respected anybody. But, see, I could do English, I could read and write pretty easily, and I was also a jock. And Larry wanted to be and was athletic, but his grades were never high enough to where he could participate in sports, which was really cruel. And so I think he sort of resentful of me. And there's a little respect there, or something, regard, and so I could work with him. There were other students like that, who somehow he appreciated or kind of liked or kind of looked up to or whatever, and we didn't pick on him, we didn't ridicule him. And so he'd get little bits of assistance in these different classes. And so that downward spiral where he would read and stumble and fail at something and get angry and curse and somebody would make fun of him and it would just go down, that kind of got reversed, or stopped at least. And things began to kind of fall in place. And he began to, sort of like in the story, come to himself and realize that he could actually do things in school and could succeed, and this could be a place for him to move into a little better life, that there were possibilities. And every little victory, every little thing that he'd master or would get past was a celebration, just a little celebration for everybody who knew. Not many did, but a few. And it felt so good to be coming out of that lost place with him. Now, isn't that a great story? It really is. It's too bad it didn't happen that way. I wish it had. While he was still a long ways off, physically and spiritually, his father saw him and ran to him and put his arms around him and gathered him in and held him and told him how much he missed him and how much he loved him and how much it hurt that he had been gone and how his heart was being healed even as he held him. And he brought him home and he got him cleaned up and he got him new clothes and he started celebrating, and the neighbors came. Everybody was invited so that everybody would know that this boy that they thought was dead and gone is back and alive. He has risen and we are raised with him, and everybody can be raised up in this moment, if we'll allow it to be. And everyone was willing to accept the one who refuses to come in, who refuses to be part of the celebration, who wants to stay distant in his earned old life the way he wants it to be as best he can, making it his own way, even though he's offered something wholly new and a celebration of this new. Larry stayed far off too. In his anger and bitterness and resentment and violence, he was like that older brother, sadly. He could not trust that there was something here for him, that there were people who would actually care for him and wanted him to rise and wanted to rise with him. He couldn't get there. He was too damaged and too hurt. And so when he turned 16, he dropped out of school, he quit, he left and he disappeared, and I never saw him again. And it breaks my heart still. These 2+ years of COVID time have seemed like lost time, like we have been lost, like we have been in exile, like life has been taken away in a way. And we're so anxious to get back to life like we knew it, to church as it was. And we are in ways. What I wonder is this: do we have to spend this whole life completely before we are able to come back? And if so, when we do, what we come back to will not be what was. It will not be what we knew. It will not be what we have created. It will not be what we have planned. It will be something wholly newfound and raised up and wrapped around us by God. So may it be. Amen.